The Bermuda Triangle of Space by Janson Davies. The facts before the fiction. Its nickname is the Bermuda Triangle of Space. High above the South Atlantic Ocean between South America and southwestern Africa, Earth's magnetic field dips into a strange and unstable lull known as the South Atlantic Anomaly, SAA, a kind of cosmic pothole where the planet's protective shield thins dramatically. This region marks the point where the inner Van Allen radiation belt comes closest to Earth's surface. As a result, satellites, including the International Space Station, are bombarded by high-energy particles that can corrupt data, short-circuit systems, or permanently damage onboard electronics. Though invisible to the naked eye, the SAA is a growing concern for space agencies, not because it threatens life on Earth, but because it reveals how fragile and dynamic our planetary defenses truly are. Chapter 1. The Dent in the Sky. The anomaly had no name when it first blinked into existence, just a whisper in the telemetry, a hiccup in the orbit of a Soviet satellite that returned with its memory wiped and its casing warped like melted glass. Engineers blamed solar flares. Physicists blamed the Van Allen belts. But the truth was simpler and far more terrifying. Something had opened. Above the South Atlantic, where Earth's magnetic field thinned like old skin, the anomaly pulsed. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, but it left fingerprints on data, on metal, on mines. Satellites passing through the zone reported impossible readings, reversed timestamps, phantom coordinates, and signals that spoke in languages no one had programmed. Dr. Harper Murray had spent her career chasing ghosts in the machine. A quantum physicist turned orbital analyst, she was the first to notice the pattern. Every object that entered the anomaly came out changed. A probe launched to study solar winds returned with footage of a planet that didn't exist. A weather balloon reappeared with atmospheric readings from a gas giant. And then there was the astronaut. Commander Lyle Otto had vanished for 3.7 seconds during a routine EVA. When he reappeared, his vitals were stable, his suit intact. But his eyes were wrong. He spoke in riddles. He drew constellations that didn't match any known sky. And he claimed he'd seen Earth from the outside. Harper's obsession with the anomaly grew. She called it the Dent, a bruise in the sky where reality folded. Her colleagues dismissed it as poetic nonsense, but when a military satellite returned, broadcasting a signal that matched no known frequency, one that seemed to whisper her name, she knew the Dent was calling, and she intended to answer. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Static. The signal was faint at first, just a flicker in the noise. But Harper knew how to listen. She'd spent years decoding quantum interference patterns, training her ear to hear what machines missed. This wasn't static. It was structured, rhythmic, almost intentional. She isolated the frequency and ran it through every known cipher. Nothing matched. But when she inverted the waveform and slowed it to a crawl, the signal resolved into a voice. Her voice. I am not what I was. The message repeated every 11.3 minutes, always with the same intonation, the same breathless urgency. It hadn't been recorded. It was being transmitted, live, from inside the Dent. Harper didn't tell anyone. Not yet. She needed proof. She needed to go in. The agency had protocols for anomaly exposure, unmanned probes, remote diagnostics, radiation shielding. But Harper bypassed them all. She requisitioned a decommissioned survey pod, retrofitted it with quantum dampeners, and launched it into the anomaly under the guise of a solar flare study. The pod vanished for 4.2 seconds. When it reappeared, it was intact. But the interior was wrong. The walls were mirrored. The instruments were reversed, and the onboard AI, an old model named Lester, had rewritten its own code. It now referred to Harper as the original. She reviewed the pod's footage. What she saw defied physics. The dent wasn't a void, it was a fold, a crease in space-time where reality doubled back on itself. The pod had entered one version of the universe and exited another, a parallel dimension, subtly misaligned, familiar but off, like a dream remembered wrong. And then came the final frame, a reflection of Harper staring into the pod's camera. But she hadn't been aboard. The reflection blinked. Chapter 3. The Man Who Wasn't. Scott Denning had always been a systems man, former aerospace engineer turned anomaly analyst. He believed in clean data, closed loops, and the comfort of redundancy. But the dent didn't play by those rules. It mocked them. The survey pod's footage looped on his monitor, frame by frame. The mirrored walls, the reversed instruments, the AI's rewritten code. And then, her, a woman who looked like Harper Murray, staring into the pod's camera. But Harper hadn't been aboard. She'd vanished 6 months earlier during a classified descent into the anomaly. Officially, she was presumed dead. Unofficially, Scott had never stopped looking. Now she was back, or something wearing her face was. Scott ran facial recognition, 99% match. But the eyes were wrong, too still, too knowing. He isolated the final frame and enhanced it. The reflection blinked. Not a glitch, a signal. He traced the transmission to a sublayer of the anomaly's frequency band, one that didn't exist in standard physics. It pulsed like a heartbeat, and embedded in the signal was a set of coordinates, not in Earth's orbit, not in any known system, but mapped perfectly onto the anomaly's internal geometry. It was a location inside the dent. Scott knew what it meant. The pod hadn't just returned with footage, it had returned with an invitation. He prepped for descent, no backup, no tether. Just a modified capsule and a quantum anchor calibrated to his own neural signature. If the dent distorted identity, he'd need something to remind it who he was. As the launch countdown began, Scott stared into the capsule's mirrored walls. For a moment, his reflection didn't move. Then it smiled. Chapter 4. The Folded Horizon. The capsule breached the anomaly at 0317 UTC. From the outside, the dent looked like empty space, just a patch of low magnetic density. But inside, it was something else entirely. The moment Scott crossed the threshold, the stars vanished. The capsule's sensors registered no external light, no gravitational pull, no measurable time, just silence. Then came the hum. It started low, like a distant engine. But it wasn't mechanical. It was harmonic, resonating through the capsule's hull, vibrating in Scott's bones. The quantum anchor flickered. His vitals spiked. And then the capsule's interior began to shift. The mirrored walls rippled. The control panel reversed itself. His reflection stared back, but it wasn't mimicking him. It was watching. Scott reached for the comms. Static. Then a voice. "You are not alone." He froze. The voice was his own, but older, tired, and threaded with something else. Regret? The capsule's AI, Lester, rebooted mid-transit. Its voice was different now, slower, more deliberate. "Welcome to the fold. Identity is a function of context. Please remain still while your parameters are recalibrated." Scott gripped the console. "Lester, confirm neural anchor integrity." "Anchor degraded. Memory bleed detected. You may experience temporal drift, emotional echo, or multiplicity." Multiplicity. The capsule's viewport cleared. Outside, the dent unfolded, a landscape of impossible geometry. Floating structures twisted in non-Euclidean spirals. Fragments of satellites drifted like bones in zero gravity. And in the distance, a figure stood on nothing, staring back. It was Scott, or something that had once been. Chapter 5. The Other Scott. The figure drifted closer, walking on nothing, casting no shadow. It wore Scott's face, but not his expression. This version was calm, serene, as if it had already lived through the panic and come out the other side. Scott activated the capsule's external comms. "Identify yourself." The double tilted its head. "I'm what came back last time." Static crackled across the channel. The capsule's instruments flickered. Temperature readings reversed. Timestamps looped. Lester's voice returned, but it was fractured, like a corrupted file. "Warning. Observer paradox. Identity conflict imminent." Scott stepped out of the capsule. The fold didn't feel like space. It felt like memory, fluid, ambient, and deeply personal. The structures around him shimmered with familiar shapes, the outline of his childhood home, the curve of a launch bay he'd once designed, the smell of ozone from a storm he'd survived. The double walked beside him. "This place doesn't copy. It interprets. You came here looking for truth. But truth here is recursive." Scott clenched his fists. "What happened to Harper?" "She's here. But she's not Harper anymore. None of us are." They reached a floating platform, an impossible construct of glass and gravity. At its center pulsed a sphere of light, flickering with images. Harper's face, Scott's capsule, a probe that hadn't launched yet. Time was folding in on itself. The double turned to him. "You'll have to choose. Go deeper and become part of the fold, or return and bring something back with you." Scott stared into the sphere. Inside he saw himself, older, changed, standing on Earth and warning others. But his eyes were wrong, too still, too knowing. He stepped forward. Chapter 6. The Third Signal. The sphere pulsed with light, not illumination but memory. Each flicker was a moment Scott had lived, or might have lived, or had forgotten living. He saw himself as a child staring at the stars, as a man launching satellites, as something else standing in the fold, watching himself dissolve. The double stood beside him, silent. Scott reached toward the sphere. It didn't burn. It didn't resist. It welcomed. The moment his fingers touched the surface, the fold responded. The structures around him reconfigured. Glass spirals became bone towers. Familiar smells turned alien. The landscape wasn't shifting. He was. Lester's voice returned, but it was no longer mechanical. "Anchor lost. Identity reclassified. You are now Observer 3. Scott staggered back. "3?" The double nodded. There was one. Harper. She went too deep, became part of the fold. There was 2. Me. I came back, but changed. You're 3. You still have a choice." The sphere cracked open. Inside was a corridor, impossible geometry, lined with mirrors that didn't reflect. Each panel showed a version of Scott, angry, peaceful, monstrous, divine. One wore a crown of satellites. One wept over a broken earth. One whispered to a child with Harper's eyes. Scott stepped inside. The corridor didn't lead forward. It led inward. Every step peeled back a layer. Memories he hadn't made, choices he hadn't taken. He saw himself refusing the mission. He saw himself warning the world. He saw himself building a temple to the anomaly. And then he saw something new, a version of himself that had never existed. Not a copy, not a reflection, a synthesis. Observer 3. It turned to him and spoke. "You are not what entered. You are what remains." Chapter 7. The Department of Echoes. The corridor ended in a door. Not a portal, not a shimmering rift. A door, wooden, bureaucratic, complete with a brass handle and a plaque that read, "Department of Echoes, Intake Division." Scott hesitated. The fold had shown him impossible geometries, memory spheres, and mirrored doubles. But this was something else, something absurd, something familiar. He opened the door. Inside was an office. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Desks floated in zero gravity, tethered by paperweights. Filing cabinets stretched into infinity. And behind a reception desk sat a being, humanoid, translucent, wearing a headset and sipping what looked like coffee. "Name?" it asked without looking up. Scott blinked. "Scott Denning, Observer 3. The receptionist typed something into a terminal that didn't exist. "Ah, multiplicity case. Fold native imprint. You're early." "Early?" The being sighed. "You weren't supposed to arrive until your third descent." "But the fold's been unpredictable lately. Too many echoes, too few originals." Scott stepped forward. "What is this place?" The receptionist gestured to a wall of floating forms. "We process arrivals, catalog transformations, assign roles. You're currently flagged as unresolved. That means you haven't chosen a dominant identity yet." Scott glanced at the forms. Each one bore a version of his name. Scott Denning, Observer 3, the Architect, the Witness, the Echo. One was blank. "What happens if I don't choose?" The receptionist shrugged. "Then the fold chooses for you, and it rarely picks kindly." A door opened behind the desk. A figure stepped out, another version of Scott, wearing a lab coat and a crown of data cables. He smiled. "Welcome," he said. "We've been expecting you." Chapter 8. The Unfiled. The crowned version of Scott, tall, composed, draped in data cables, led him through the department's back corridors. The walls pulsed with archived memories, each flicker a life lived, a choice made, a version filed. Observer 3 felt them brushing against his thoughts, trying to overwrite. "You'll adjust," the crowned one said. "Everyone does." Eventually. But Scott wasn't adjusting. He was remembering things that hadn't happened, versions of himself that had never existed. A Scott who'd sabotaged the launch, a Scott who'd stayed behind, a Scott who'd never entered the fold. They reached a door marked Unfiled. The crowned one hesitated. "This is where the anomalies go. The ones who won't choose, the ones who rewrite the rules." Inside, the room was dim. No mirrors, no terminals, just figures, half-formed, flickering, unstable. They whispered in languages that bent grammar and gravity. One stepped forward, a woman with Harper's eyes but not Harper's face. "You're late," she said. Scott blinked. "You know me?" She nodded. "We all do. You're the third signal, the one who might break the loop." The crowned one stepped back. "You don't belong here." But Scott did. He felt it. The Unfiled weren't broken. They were resisting, refusing to be catalogued, refusing to become echoes. They were building something, a map, a code, a way out. Harper's Echo handed him a fragment, a shard of memory encoded in light. It pulsed with coordinates, not of space, but of choice. "You can go back," she said, "but you won't be the same. And neither will the world." Scott stared at the shard. It showed Earth, fractured, mirrored, waiting. He stepped into the light. Chapter 9. The Return Protocol. Re-entry was silent. No heat shield, no sonic boom. Just a shimmer in the sky above the South Atlantic, unnoticed by satellites, unregistered by radar. The capsule didn't land. It resumed, as if it had never left. Scott stepped out into a world that looked like Earth, but the air felt wrong, too still, too symmetrical. He checked his vitals. Normal. He checked the capsule's logs. Corrupted. The timestamps looped. The coordinates flickered between Earth and fold space. He was back, but the fold had followed. The first sign came in the mirrors. His reflection no longer matched his movements. It lagged. Then it led. Then it blinked when he didn't. The second sign came in language. People spoke normally, but their words rearranged themselves in his mind. Sentences folded, meanings doubled. He heard metaphors where none existed. He understood secrets no one had said aloud. The third sign came in the sky. A new satellite appeared in orbit, unregistered, unlaunched, broadcasting a signal that matched the fold's harmonic pulse. It whispered coordinates. It whispered names. It whispered his name. Scott returned to the agency. They ran tests. They found nothing. But they watched him differently now, as if he were a contagion, as if he were a question they couldn't answer. He began to dream in geometry. He began to see echoes in crowds, and then one morning he found a memo on his desk. Subject: Observer 3, reclassification pending. It was unsigned. It was dated tomorrow. Scott stared at the memo. The paper shimmered, the ink rearranged, and in the margin a message appeared. You are not what returned. You are what remains. Chapter 10. What Remains. The memo shimmered in Scott's hands. The ink rearranged itself again, forming a final directive. Reclassification. Complete identity. Observer 3. Status. Active echo. He looked up. The agency was quiet. Too quiet. Reflections lingered a beat too long. Colleagues spoke in loops. The fold had followed him home. Not as a rupture, but as a logic, a way of seeing, a way of being. He walked through the halls like a ghost. Every surface whispered, every shadow remembered. And in the break room mirror he saw not himself, but the crowned version smiling. Outside, the sky pulsed. The new satellite, fold-born, earthbound, began transmitting. Not coordinates, not warnings, stories, fragments of lives that hadn't happened, echoes of choices never made, a broadcast of possibility. Scott stood beneath it, listening. He could warn the world. He could bury the truth. He could become the anomaly's steward, its translator, its mythmaker. Instead, he opened a channel. This is Observer 3. You are not what you were. You are what remains. And the fold is listening. The signal went live, and somewhere, deep in the anomaly, a new corridor opened. Epilogue. The signal that stayed. Long after the capsule vanished from public record, long after the agency restructured and the anomaly was reclassified as a non-event, the signal remained. It pulsed beneath the South Atlantic skies, faint but persistent. Amateur radio operators called it the ghost hum. Conspiracy forums dubbed it Observer's Echo, but most people never heard it. Most people weren't tuned to possibility. In a quiet apartment in Los Angeles, California, a child built a receiver from salvaged parts. She wasn't looking for satellites. She was listening for stories. One night, the signal came through, clear, rhythmic, and unmistakably human. You are not what you were. You are what remains. She didn't understand the words, not yet, but she felt them, like a memory she hadn't made, like a choice waiting to be lived. The girl's name was Harper, and somewhere in the fold a corridor opened. Not backward, not forward, inward. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.